I was enjoying my morning coffee when the knock came. Not a polite, neighborly knock, a sharp, authoritative pounding. I sighed, setting my mug down. It was only a matter of time before she tried something like this. I opened the door to find two uniformed officers standing on my porch, hands resting on their belts, and just behind them, standing smugly with her arms crossed, was Karen Delacroix, HOA president, neighborhood tyrant, a woman who clearly didn't know who she was dealing with. One of the officers, a burly man with a clipboard, cleared his throat. "Sir, we received a report about multiple HOA violations at this property." I didn't even have to ask who made the report. Karen took a slow step forward, her saccharine smile barely masking the glee in her voice. "It's such a shame, really. We try to keep the neighborhood orderly, but some people think they can ignore the rules." She glanced pointedly at my driveway. "That thing doesn't belong here." I followed her gaze to my car, a matte black armored SUV. Not exactly a common sight in a quiet suburb, but given the kind of work I'd done in my career, I wasn't about to drive anything less secure. I looked back at Karen. "You called the police because you don't like my car?" She let out a small, exaggerated laugh. "Oh, Matthew, it's not personal. Rules are rules." The other officer, a younger guy, sighed. "Sir, she also reported that you planted unauthorized trees on HOA land." I raised an eyebrow. "You mean my yard?" Karen's smile thinned. "The HOA has strict guidelines about landscaping approvals. You can't just plant whatever you want." I glanced over at the row of Japanese maples I had planted last week. Perfectly spaced, carefully maintained, and infinitely more tasteful than the plastic flamingo nightmare Karen had in her own front yard. I turned back to the officers. "Anything else?" The first officer hesitated, glancing at his notes. There's also a complaint about threatening the HOA." That made me laugh. "Let me guess," I said, looking straight at Karen. "I threatened the HOA by not paying your ridiculous fees?" Karen's lips twitched, but she didn't deny it. I exhaled slowly, pinching the bridge of my nose. I had spent years dealing with corrupt politicians, dirty officials, and real criminals. I came to this neighborhood for peace, for a quiet life away from the power struggles and courtroom battles. But Karen, she was exactly the kind of person I'd spent my career taking down. I looked at the officers, my expression calm. "Do I seem like the kind of man who breaks the law?" The older cop shifted awkwardly. "Well, we do need to see some identification." I nodded, stepping back into the house. If they wanted paperwork, I'd give them paperwork. Karen stood a little straighter, already tasting victory. She had no idea what was coming. I took my time retrieving my papers, making sure every movement was deliberate. If the officers wanted identification, I'd give it to them. I handed them my driver's license, property deed, and, just for fun, my federal judiciary ID. The officer took the documents, skimming them over with a careful expression. Karen, standing just behind him, looked far too pleased with herself. "Well," she said impatiently, "go ahead and issue the citation." The officer hesitated. He wasn't stupid. He had clearly seen my title. But whether it was arrogance or pressure from Karen, he cleared his throat and continued. "Sir, we still need you to sign a violation ticket," he said, holding out a clipboard. I didn't move. "Violation of what exactly?" The officer shifted his weight. "Parking in an unauthorized spot and violating HOA landscaping regulations." I raised an eyebrow. "And which law says I have to follow HOA regulations when I never signed their contract?" The younger cop frowned, flipping through his notes. He was searching for an answer. He didn't have one. Karen, however, had plenty to say. She scoffed, stepping forward like a queen addressing her subjects. "Don't you understand the law?" she snapped. "I'm the HOA. I make the laws here." For a moment, the only sound was the breeze rustling through my newly planted Japanese maples. Then I smirked. Slowly, deliberately, I turned my gaze back to the officer, locking eyes with him. "Are you sure you want to continue this?" I asked, my voice calm, measured. The officer swallowed. Before he could answer, his radio crackled to life. "Unit 12, stand by. This is the sheriff's office." The officers froze. Karen's smug expression wavered. The radio continued, the voice on the other end suddenly very cautious. "Do not take further action against the homeowner. Return his documents immediately. Over." A heavy silence fell over the porch. Then, without another word, the older cop shoved my papers back into my hand, his face noticeably paler than before. "Sorry, sir," he muttered, avoiding my eyes. Seems there's been a mistake. We'll leave now. Karen's mouth fell open. What? But I. The officers didn't wait. They turned on their heels and walked straight back to their patrol car. Karen stood there, blinking rapidly, completely lost. I watched her for a moment, then tucked my papers back into my pocket and stepped closer, lowering my voice just enough for her to hear. Next time, Karen, I said smoothly, do your homework before you play games you can't win. She had no idea who she had just messed with, but she was about to find out. Karen wasn't the type to accept defeat. The moment the police backed off, I knew she wouldn't let it go. Women like her, the ones who built their power on intimidation and control, didn't just walk away when they lost. They doubled down. And that's exactly what she did. Within 24 hours, the rumors started. Whispers spread from porch to porch over morning coffee and late-night phone calls. Did you hear? That new guy, he's dangerous. They say he's got ties to, well, you know. He threatened the HOA. That's why the police had to get involved. Karen had orchestrated the whole thing. She painted me as a threat, twisting the truth into something far more sinister. The armored SUV, clearly the vehicle of a criminal. The refusal to pay HOA dues, proof that I was trying to destabilize the community. The fact that the cops backed off. She spun it into some kind of conspiracy, saying I had connections in high places that forced them to drop the case. And people believed her. Not all of them, of course. Some were just scared, afraid of going against her, afraid of becoming her next target. Others, the ones who had blindly followed her for years, latched onto her words like gospel. But a few just watched. Not openly, not aggressively, but I could feel their eyes on me whenever I stepped outside. They weren't buying Karen's story entirely, but they also weren't sure what to believe. That was fine, because soon they would see exactly who she really was. Karen's next move was predictable. She called an emergency HOA meeting, mandatory attendance. The topic? A class action lawsuit against me. She stood at the front of the room using her usual tactics, fear, authority, manipulation, to push the residents into signing. This man is a threat to our way of life, she declared. If we don't act now, we could lose everything. Some nodded. Some hesitated. I wasn't there, of course. I didn't need to be, because Karen had just made the biggest mistake of her life. She thought she was turning the neighborhood against me. What she didn't realize, she was turning the spotlight onto herself. And I was about to burn her whole empire to the ground. Karen thought she was winning. She paraded through the neighborhood with the same smug confidence, smiling at every resident as if she had already sealed my fate. She held meetings, rallied supporters, and convinced herself that the lawsuit would be enough to force me out. She had no idea that while she was busy playing queen, I was taking her kingdom apart, piece by piece. I started with the financials. HOAs were supposed to be transparent, but Karen ran hers like a personal slush fund. It didn't take much digging to trace over $1 million funneled through bogus invoices, consulting fees, and maintenance projects that never actually happened. Where did the money go? Luxury vacations, high-end shopping sprees, a second property, one not listed under her name, but under a shell company she controlled. And that was just the beginning. Next, I looked into property records. Karen's power didn't just come from enforcing petty fines, it came from fear. She had spent years targeting homeowners who spoke out against her, slapping them with fines until they either fell in line or lost their homes. But here's what she never expected. Forgery leaves a paper trail. A deep dive into old land records revealed falsified signatures, proof that she had forged consent forms, illegally transferring ownership of foreclosed homes to investors connected to her personally. She wasn't just running a corrupt HOA. She was running a real estate scam at the expense of the people she claimed to protect. But the real prize? The recordings. Karen's inner circle liked to keep their meetings private, but I had other methods of getting information. A few well-placed recording devices, and suddenly I had everything. Her ordering board members to drive out rebellious homeowners, her laughing about how easy it was to manipulate the community, her bragging that once Lawson is gone, I'll make an example out of him. No one will ever question me again. She was finished. She just didn't know it yet. Meanwhile, Karen was still convinced she was in control. She was so confident, in fact, that she held a press conference in front of the community center. Cameras rolled as she declared her final victory, announcing to the world that she would force me out of the neighborhood at all costs. She had no idea that the real battle wasn't happening in front of reporters. It was happening in the shadows, where I had already built my case, where her empire was already crumbling. I didn't respond. I didn't defend myself. I didn't try to stop her. I just waited, because soon the truth would speak for itself. And when it did, Karen Delacroix would have nowhere left to hide. The HOA meeting was packed. Karen had made sure of that. She had called for a mandatory vote, rallying her supporters one last time to officially evict me from the neighborhood. The energy in the room was electric. Some residents were eager to see me gone. Others just wanted to stay on Karen's good side. And me? I just walked in, calm as ever. Karen stood at the front, wearing her signature smug expression, tapping her manicured nails against the podium. She was ready to deliver her final blow. "Residents," she announced, her voice ringing with authority, "tonight we make a decision that will protect our beloved community." She cast a glance in my direction, barely masking her glee. "Matthew Lawson has repeatedly violated HOA regulations, refused to comply with our rules, and has been a disruptive force in our neighborhood." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. Karen straightened her papers, preparing for the vote. But before she could continue, I stepped forward, slowly, deliberately, and placed a thick stack of documents on the table. "Before you do that, Karen," I said, my voice smooth and even, "I have some documents to share too." The room fell silent as I began flipping through the pages. Every sheet a nail in her coffin. Financial records, tracing over $1 million of stolen HOA funds directly to Karen's personal accounts. Land documents, proving she had forged signatures to seize properties and sell them for profit. Recorded transcripts, Karen's own words, plotting illegal evictions and laughing about how easy it was to manipulate the community. Gasps filled the room. Karen's face drained of color. She lunged forward, grabbing at the papers with trembling hands. "These are all fake," she shrieked. This is a setup! You can't do this to me!" I leaned back, glanced at my watch, and smirked. "Oh, Karen," I said, just loud enough for everyone to hear. "I didn't do anything." I looked toward the back of the room, and this is where 2 men in dark suits had just entered. The FBI did. Karen froze. The room erupted in chaos. Before she could even process what was happening, the agents stepped forward, flashing their badges. "Karen Delacroix," one of them said, his voice cutting through the noise, "you're under arrest for fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy to commit real estate fraud." Karen stumbled back, eyes darting wildly as if looking for someone, anyone, to help her. But no one moved, not her board members, not her loyal followers. The same people who once feared her were now watching, silently relieved that her reign of terror was over. The cuffs clicked around her wrists. She thrashed, screeching like a cornered animal. "You can't do this," she howled. "I'm the HOA. I make the rules." One of the agents barely looked at her as he muttered, "Not anymore." As they dragged her away, she twisted her head, locking eyes with me one last time. There was pure hatred in her gaze, mixed with something else. Fear. She had spent her entire life believing she was untouchable. And now, she had finally learned the truth. She never wrote the rules. I did. The moment Karen's cuffs locked into place, the entire room erupted. Some residents gasped. Others whispered furiously to one another, eyes darting between me and the FBI agents now swarming the community center. And Karen? She completely lost it. "This can't be happening," she shrieked, struggling against the agents as they tightened their grip on her arms. "I'm the law here." The officers barely acknowledged her as they moved through the room, rounding up the rest of the HOA board members, the treasurer, the vice president, Karen's hand-picked enforcers. One by one, they were all let out in cuffs. Their crimes had been well documented: fraud, forgery, embezzlement, illegal evictions. Some of them tried to resist, throwing out excuses, claiming ignorance, but the FBI wasn't interested in their stories. The evidence spoke for itself. Across the room, one agent flipped open a large metal case, pulling out an official seal before slamming it onto a stack of documents. Confiscated by federal authorities. The HOA's entire office was sealed off. Records, bank statements, property contracts. Everything Karen had built, gone in an instant. A heavy silence settled over the residents. For years, they had feared the HOA, feared the power Karen wielded, feared the consequences of fighting back. But now, as they watched her dragged out in chains, the truth finally sank in. The HOA was finished. Karen's reign was over. And for the first time in a long time, the people of this neighborhood were finally free. The first official meeting after Karen's arrest was unlike any other. For years, HOA meetings had been tense, controlled affairs, filled with Karen's demands, arbitrary fines, and veiled threats. But tonight, the residents gathered for one purpose: to decide the fate of the HOA itself. The discussion was short. There was no debate, no argument, no hesitation. When the vote came, it was unanimous. The HOA was officially dissolved. For the first time in over a decade, the neighborhood was free. No more endless rules, no more ridiculous fees, no more tyrants telling people how to live in their own homes. The district had been liberated. After the meeting, a few residents approached me. Some shook my hand. Others clapped me on the back, offering their thanks. "Man," one guy chuckled, shaking his head, "I don't know how you did it, but you really took her down." A woman next to him nodded. "Seriously, without you, she'd still be running this place like a dictatorship." I just shrugged, offering them a small smirk. "I'm just a HOA hater like you." That was enough for them. They laughed, nodded in agreement, and went on their way. They had no idea who I really was, and that was exactly how I wanted it. The courtroom was packed. Reporters lined the walls, their cameras ready to capture the downfall of Karen Delacroix, once the self-proclaimed queen of the neighborhood, now just another convicted felon. She sat at the defendant's table, her hands trembling, her once perfect composure completely shattered. The judge's voice rang out, steady and final. "Karen Delacroix, you have been found guilty of financial fraud, embezzlement, falsification of legal documents, and abuse of power. Given the severity of your crimes and the years of harm you have caused, this court sentences you to 25 years in federal prison." The room fell silent. For a moment, Karen just sat there, frozen. Then realization set in. She had lost. Her reign was over. Her empire was gone, and for the first time in her life, she had no way out. She shot up from her seat, her face twisted in rage. "I was framed," she screamed. "This is a setup. Who did this?" Her eyes frantically scanned the courtroom, searching for an enemy, for someone to blame. Then she saw me, sitting in the front row, calm, silent, watching. Her expression flickered. Confusion, frustration, fear. She still had no idea who I was. I stood up slowly, adjusting my jacket, stepping toward her just enough for her to hear me. Then, with a cold, knowing smile, I said, "You did it to yourself, Karen." Her breath hitched, and before she could say another word, the guards grabbed her arms and dragged her away. She screamed all the way out of the courtroom. I didn't watch her go. I had already won. With Karen gone, the neighborhood finally breathed again. No more surprise fines. No more ridiculous rules. No more power-hungry tyrants dictating how people live their lives. For the first time in years, people could simply exist, without fear of a letter, a citation, or a petty threat disguised as community standards. Lawns grew exactly how homeowners wanted them. Cars parked wherever they fit. Families repainted their houses in colors they actually liked. The neighborhood didn't fall apart without the HOA. It thrived. Of course. Whispers still lingered. People talked about what had happened, Karen's fall, the sudden collapse of the HOA, the mysterious man who had walked into town, sat back, and watched it all burn. Some of the braver ones approached me. "So, Matt," one of them said one morning as I sat on my porch, coffee in hand, "people are wondering, who are you really?" I took a slow sip, letting the question hang in the air. Then, with a small smile, I answered, "Just someone who doesn't like to be controlled." That was enough for them. They nodded, satisfied, and life went on. As I stepped out of the courthouse, the crisp morning air filled my lungs. The world outside felt lighter, as if the weight of corruption had finally been lifted. Karen was gone. Her empire had crumbled, and the law, the very thing she had twisted and abused for years, had been the very thing that destroyed her. I paused for a moment, tilting my head up toward the sky. The sun was shining. The world kept turning. And me? I just smiled. The law is really the most interesting thing, I murmured to myself, my voice carrying just enough amusement. Then, with one last glance over my shoulder at the courthouse behind me, I added, "When you're the one who writes it." And with that, I walked away.